as he always did, to the silence. It was no longer just an absence of sound. In the 2 years since Elara had been gone, the silence had become a physical presence. It was a thick, heavy blanket woven from dust motes and memory, one he had pulled around himself for comfort and now found he could not breathe without. He swung his legs, thin and pale, over the side of the bed. The wooden floor was cold against his bare feet. Elara had always insisted he wear slippers. "You'll catch your death, Arthur," she'd scold, her voice a mix of genuine concern and feigned exasperation. He saw them, a worn tartan pair, tucked neatly under her side of the bed, exactly where she had left them, next to her own. He never wore his. The cold was a reminder. His morning routine was a ritual, a quiet liturgy of loss. He moved through the dim-lit house to the kitchen. The linoleum was cold, too. He put the kettle on, the click and sudden hiss of the gas flame absurdly loud in the stillness. He spooned Nescafe granules into 2 mugs. Her favorite was a chipped porcelain thing with a painted robin. Its red breast faded from 1,000 washes. His was just blue, solid, unremarkable. He poured the boiling water, inhaling the acrid, familiar smell of instant coffee. He placed her mug on the counter, on the small, warped cork coaster she'd always used. He added a splash of milk and 1 sugar, just how she liked it. He took his own, black, to the small formica table by the window and sat. He drank his coffee. He watched the light move across the overgrown garden, illuminating the weeds that were choking her hydrangeas. She would have hated that. He'd let them go, just as he'd let himself go. The garden was a jungle. He was its lonely ghost. When his cup was empty, he stood. He picked up her full, untouched mug. The coffee was lukewarm now. He carried it to the sink and poured it, steam and all, down the drain. The gurgle of the pipes was the only reply. He had done this every morning for 731 days. His house was not a home. It was a museum of her. He was its reverent, lonely curator. He moved through the spaces, careful not to disturb the exhibits. Her reading glasses, the ones with the little tortoiseshell flick, rested on top of Middlemarch. The book she was rereading for the 5th time, face down on the arm of her chair as if she'd just gotten up to make tea. Her gardening boots, caked with the dry, cracked mud of her last battle with the rose bushes, were by the back door. Her scent, a faint floral mix of cold cream, lavender, and something uniquely Elara, still clung to the cushions of that armchair. Arthur existed in these spaces, but he did not live in them. He was a man living in the past tense, his life a story that had ended mid-chapter. He was just rereading the same final page over and over. Today, however, the silence had an intruder. Drip. A pause. Drip. It was coming from the hallway, a hollow, rhythmic punctuation to his grief. He'd put a bucket under the stain in the ceiling 2 winters ago, just after. It was a wide, ugly stain now, the color of weak tea, spreading like a disease across the plaster. The bucket was a bright orange plastic thing, a garish splash of color in the muted, gray-toned world he inhabited. He'd meant to empty it. He walked to the hallway. The bucket was 3/4 full, the water inside it stagnant and gray. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was a small, gnawing irritation. It was an imperfection in his perfect shrine. He glared at the stain. It had been raining that day, too. A cold, miserable October rain that had slicked the roads and blurred the world through the windscreen. Elara had mentioned the stain that very water. I'll look at it on the weekend. He'd never looked at it. And now, the drip was an accusation. You failed. You failed. You failed. He sighed, the sound loud in the quiet house. He'd empty it later. He turned and went back to the bedroom. It was Sunday. Sunday was the day he charged her phone. It sat on her nightstand, a sleek black rectangle of glass and metal. It had always felt alien in his hands, cold and impersonal. He was a man of wood, of paper, of things that yielded to touch and time. He built birdhouses in his workshop. He read thick, heavy hardbacks. Elara had been the one to embrace the new. "Oh, Arthur, you have to see this," she'd say, her face illuminated by its glow, showing him a picture of their grandchild, Tom's boy, covered in spaghetti, or a video of a cat playing a piano, or a text from her sister. He'd usually just grunt and nod, retreating to the analog comfort of his workshop. The phone to him was a symbol of the world that was leaving him behind, a world that had, in the end, taken her with it. He picked it up. The screen was dark, a black mirror. He saw his own face reflected, tired, gray, haunted. His hair was thin, his eyes watery. He didn't recognize the man staring back. He carried it to the outlet by his side of the bed, his movements practiced, almost tender. He plugged the white cord into its base. The screen lit up. The wallpaper photo appeared, and as it always did, it stole his breath. It was Elara, 20 years younger, on the beach at Cornwall. Her hair, still mostly brown then, was caught in the wind, a wild halo around her head. She was laughing into the camera, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Sand was on her nose. She was holding his old sun hat, triumphant, having just stolen it from his head. She was so painfully, vibrantly alive. He sat on the edge of the bed, his thumb hovering over the screen. He just wanted to look at the photo. That's all he ever did. He would sit with it for an hour, the bright image a stark contrast to the dim room, until the screen timed out and went dark again. He'd tap it, bring her back. Then he'd unplug it and put it back on her nightstand for another week. But today, his thumb, clumsy with age and a slight tremor he'd developed, slipped. Instead of just tapping the screen to keep it awake, he swiped. The screen changed. A grid of colorful squares appeared. Mail, calendar, photos, weather. He panicked. This was her world, her private space. He'd done this before, accidentally. It felt like trespassing. He'd always jab at the screen, a blind, flailing motion, until by sheer luck he hit the home button and the photo of Elara returned. He tried to do that now, but his trembling thumb landed on a yellow square. It had a picture of a legal pad on it. The screen changed again. A white page appeared, filled with lists. He froze. His heart, a dull, slow-beating thing that he rarely noticed anymore, gave a single, painful lurch. He shouldn't be here. This was wrong. This was like reading her diary. He should close it. He would close it. But his eyes were betraying him. They were scanning the words, and the words were pulling him in. They were so mundane, so her. Groceries. Milk, the good kind. Birdseed, bullfinch mix. Lasagna sheets, check veggie recipe. That soap Arthur likes. He swallowed. He hadn't known she'd made a point to buy that soap he likes. He just thought it was the kind they always got. Tom's birthday ideas. Book on astronomy. He mentioned the comet. That silly video game he wanted? Ask him first. New jumper, blue or green. Book club reads. Where the Crawdads Sing, finish by November. She never finished it. The book was still on her nightstand, a bookmark on page 54. He scrolled, his thumb moving with a life of its own. He was drowning in the mundane details of her last days, in the simple forward momentum of a life that had no idea it was about to stop. And then, at the very top of the list, he saw a single line, separate from the others. It was dated. Note, October 23rd, 2022. He stopped breathing. October 23rd, the day, the last day. He fumbled for the reading glasses on his own nightstand and put them on. His hands were shaking so badly it was hard to focus. The small black letters swam before his eyes. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the date. It was a digital headstone. Finally, with a finger that felt like it belonged to someone else, he tapped the line. A new screen opened. It was a blank page with just a few sentences of text. He began to read. Stupid, stupid roof. That stain in the hallway is getting bigger. Need to call Gregson's first thing tomorrow. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. The leak, the bucket, the accusation. She had been on it. She was going to fix it. He read on. Arthur will huff and puff about the cost, but it has to be done before winter. It's just water now, but it'll be the whole ceiling next. He's so stubborn, but he'll see I'm right. He always does. He read the words, and he could hear her. He could hear the exasperated sigh, the determined set of her jaw. He could see her standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, thumbing in the words with that quick, two-thumb dexterity he'd always marveled at. And he felt a wave of shame. She was right. He would have huffed. He'd have complained about Gregson's prices, about how they didn't build things to last anymore, about the disruption. He'd dismissed her worry that very morning. It's fine, Elara. He thought the note was over. It was just a simple, practical reminder, a glimpse into her day. He was about to close it, the guilt mixing with the familiar, dull ache of his grief. But his eyes scanned down. There was one more line. It was separate from the paragraph above it, as if added as an afterthought. A final, quiet truth typed just before she'd locked the screen and put the phone in her coat pocket. I'll tell him tonight. I love him so. Arthur made a sound, a small, dry gasp, like a man who'd been punched in the chest. He stared at the words. I love him so. He read it again, and again. The three words vibrated on the screen, blurring through the sudden hot tears that filled his eyes. He had spent 2 years, 731 days, cultivating the memory of their last conversation. It haunted his every waking moment and poisoned his dreams. It had been brief, unremarkable, and on his part, cold. She'd poked her head into his workshop, pulling on her coat. He was at his bench, carving a small, intricate wren from a block of basswood. The curve of the wing was giving him trouble. I'm just popping to the shops, dear. Need anything? He hadn't looked up. He'd squinted at the wood, his chisel poised. No, I'm fine. All right, it's miserable out. See you tonight. That was it. That was the last word he'd ever spoken to her. Not I love you, not drive safe, not even a proper goodbye, just a distracted grunt, his attention focused more on a piece of dead wood than on the living, breathing woman in the doorway. A pickup truck, speeding, had run a red light. She'd never made it to the the shops, she'd never come home. Tonight never happened. His guilt over that final, dismissive had been his constant companion. It was the food he ate, the air he breathed. He'd convinced himself, in the long, silent nights, that he had failed her, that at the end, he was a bitter, distracted old man, unworthy of the vibrant life she'd lived. He'd assumed her love had, like everything else, worn down over time, eroded by his silences, his grumpiness, his retreat into his workshop. But this note, this final, secret message, I'll tell him tonight. I love him so. She wasn't just planning to tell him about the roof. She was planning to tell him that. She had known he was stubborn. She had known he would huff, and it hadn't mattered. She had seen the man underneath the grumpiness, and she had loved him. A single tear fell from his eye and splashed onto the phone screen, right on the word love. He wiped it away, frantic, as if he could erase the tear itself, as if it were a stain on something holy. The phone, this cold piece of glass he had always resented, held more warmth than his entire silent house. It wasn't a relic. It was a letter, and it had just been delivered, 2 years late. Drip, drip, drip. The sound from the hallway was impossibly loud, a drumbeat of accusation and now of hope. Stupid, stupid roof. Arthur stood up, his legs shaking. He clutched the phone in his hand, his lifeline. He walked to the hallway and stood under the stain, staring up at the cracked, peeling plaster. This was the task she had left him. Arthur stood in the hallway, the phone a heavy, warm anchor in his hand. The note glowed on its screen. I love him so. Drip, drip, drip. The sound from the bucket was the same, but his world had tilted. He looked from the note to the ceiling stain. Arthur will huff and puff about the cost. A small, watery smile broke the granite of his face. I won't huff, Elara, he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp, rusty from disuse. I promise, my love. I won't huff. For 2 years, he had let this leak persist. He realized now, with a clarity that stung, that he'd kept it as a monument to his failure. It was a wound in the house that matched the wound in his heart. But the note changed everything. It wasn't a memory to be preserved. It was an instruction, not fixing it. That was the betrayal of her practical, caring love. He walked back to the kitchen, his movements suddenly decisive. He set the phone on the counter, the note still illuminated like a prayer candle. He went to the drawer by the landline and pulled out her worn, leather-bound address book. He flipped to G. Gregson's Roofing. The number was circled twice in red ink. He picked up the heavy receiver of the old rotary phone. His finger, shaking, spun the dial. The whir of the mechanism was loud, a sound of action in a house of stillness. Gregson's Roofing, Mark speaking. The voice was young, alert. Arthur's throat closed. He'd expected a machine. Hello, he stammered. My name is Arthur Findlay. At 407 Willow Lane. I have a leak in my hallway. There was a pause. Mr. Findlay? Goodness, I'm Mark Gregson, George Gregson's son. My dad and your wife, Elara. They served on the town preservation committee together. He always said what a wonderful, organized woman she was. Arthur gripped the receiver. He hadn't known that. He'd forgotten she was Elara Findlay, a pillar of the community. Yes, she was, he managed, his voice thick. Mark's voice turned gentle. "We can't have that. For Elara's husband, I can be there tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. No charge for the estimate. Tomorrow. 9. A time, a date, a piece of the future, inserted into his static life." "Thank you, Mark," Arthur said. That would be fine. Thank you." He hung up. The click of the receiver was a sound of finality. He had done it. He looked at Elara's phone. He'd been tending her grave, but this note wasn't from a grave. It was from a life that was annoyed and practical and worried about the winter, and so full of love it spilled out onto a digital notepad. He had been drowning in the guilt of his final but her note wasn't about that single moment. It was about 50 years of knowing him. He walked to the hallway. He picked up the ugly orange bucket, heavy with 2 years of stagnant neglect. He carried it to the bathroom and poured the water down the tub drain. The sound was a roar, a final emptying. He put the bucket away in the cupboard under the stairs. He went to the kitchen and retrieved a large silver cooking pot, placing it under the drip. It was a solution, not a shrine. Then he went to the sink. He picked up her mug, the one with the robin, which he'd left there that morning. He didn't just rinse it. He got the washing up liquid, squirted a little in, and washed it gently. He dried it with a clean tea towel and put it back on the shelf, handle facing out. The ritual was broken. He wouldn't be making her coffee tomorrow. It felt like a small, sharp pain, but also a relief. The house felt different, expectant. He found himself drawn to his workshop. He opened the door. The air was cold, smelling of sawdust and old oil. Dust lay thick on every surface. It was here he'd last spoken to her. On the workbench, under a fine gray shroud, was the wren. He picked it up. A small wooden bird, half-formed. His chisel lay beside it. He stared at the wing. The tiny curve of wood that had seemed more important than his wife. He had hated this object. It was the symbol of his final failure. He sat on his workbench stool, the phone in one hand, the wooden bird in the other. He turned the phone on and found the note again. "He's so stubborn. I love him so." She had known him. She had seen his stubbornness, his retreat into this cold room, and she had loved him. She hadn't loved a perfect, attentive man. She had loved him, the man who carved birds and grunted. His guilt was his own invention. His hand, stiff with arthritis, closed around the chisel. He touched its sharp metal edge to the bird's unfinished wing. He would finish it, for her. At 7 o'clock sharp, the landline rang. The sound made him jump. Tom. He walked back into the house, which was dark now. He flicked on the kitchen light. "Hello." "Hi, Dad. How are you?" Tom's voice. His son, living, breathing. "I'm all right, son," Arthur said. The usual script was to say fine, and then they would exchange 2 minutes of polite, empty conversation. The message in the bottle was about not letting that happen. "Dad." "Tom," Arthur said, his voice suddenly thick. I did something today. I called the roofers about the leak." There was a stunned silence. You did? Wow. Dad, that's great. I'm glad. And I was looking at your mother's phone today." "Oh, Dad," Tom said, his voice full of a gentle, practiced worry. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "No," Arthur said, cutting him off gently. "No, you don't understand. I found a note. She wrote it that morning, the last morning." What did it say?" Arthur took a deep, shaking breath. He read the whole thing, the part about the stupid roof, the part about him huffing and puffing, and then, his voice cracking, he read the last line. "I'll tell him tonight. I love him so." He was crying now, a raw, silent weeping that shook his whole body. She knew I was a stubborn old fool, Tom. And she loved me. Tom was silent. Arthur could hear his son's sharp, hitched breath. "She did, Dad," Tom said, his own voice thick. "We all knew. You were her stubborn old fool. She wouldn't have had you any other way." It was a key, turning a lock. It wasn't his private discovery. It was a shared, spoken truth. "I miss her so much, Tom." "I know, Dad. I do too. I love you, son," Arthur said. The words felt huge and clumsy, but he got them out. "I love you too, Dad. I'll come by tomorrow. After the roofer, we can have lunch." "Yes," Arthur said. "Yes, I'd like that." They said goodbye and hung up. Arthur sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but the silence was no longer an enemy. It was just a room, a space that held 50 years of a life, the echo of her laughter, and the final, shining truth of her love. He had received a message, not from the dead, but for the living. He had missed his last tonight with her, a regret he would carry always. But Tom was alive, and he, Arthur Findlay, was, for the first time in 2 years, alive too. He stood up. He washed his own blue mug from